everyone, and welcome back to another episode of IndieQuest, your celebration of the indie and obscure. As always, I'm Steve, here to talk some indie games with you today. And today we're going to be talking probably a little bit more than just indie games. It'll still be indie. Don't worry, we'll weave it in as we always do, but I imagine that there'll be some other stuff kind of mixed in as well, because we have a very special guest on board with us today. But before we get around to introducing them, I should introduce you to your familiar co-hosts. First, Josh. Josh, how you doing today, bud?
Oh, I'm doing really good. I just got off work. I'm really excited for this. My partner brought me some tiramisu latte, and I'll tell you what, this thing is crazy good. So I'm excited to talk today.
Heck yeah. He was talking about, he didn't have the bubbles, right? Are you a little concerned about the amount of bubbles that you're receiving in that beverage?
I was hoping for bubbles, but didn't get any, but it's still delicious. So
all right.
There we go.
All right. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. And of course, we've got Seth, Captain Drachma. Seth, what's good in your world, buddy?
It's a wonderful Friday night, which is strange for all of us to be recording on a Friday night. But there is a very specific reason that is happening. So I will introduce Jimmy Happa has decided that he would grace us with his presence tonight. Jimmy, how about you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about what you do on YouTube?
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction. You guys are very professional. You guys are so good at this. I would say that you guys allowed me to come along, grace me with your presence here with your IndieQuest podcast. But I'm just a simple guy. Just do a bunch of videos that I put on YouTube about mostly Japanese games. Not specifically indie games. Some of them might be considered like really old school indie games, but obscure stuff. So things that you guys are really interested. So they're so there's a little bit of a crossover maybe, but that's my spiel. Just a guy who makes videos about Japanese games. And Seth has been very nice over the past year or so, trying to get me to do projects and inviting me on this podcast. So I'm excited to talk about indie games and hopefully going a little bit out of my comfort zone as well.
Before we even go any further, there is an age-old debate on this podcast. You mentioned older games that could be considered indie.
Okay.
Would you consider Shantae to be indie?
The Game Boy Color version specifically.
Game Boy Color version.
Well, if you want to, some people would say, well, I think Capcom published that back in the day, right?
Yes.
So there's that old debate, but I would say, in my gray definition of an indie game, yes, I don't want to make any enemies here, but I would consider it one of the most successful indie franchises, and that original game too just kind of came out of nowhere.
Yes.
What the heck was a Shantae, right?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. That's kind of what I say. I think back in those days, there's no online, right? So without that big publisher, there's no way to make a game. That's my argument. Steve's got his own opinions, and we don't even listen to those.
It's a question without an answer, okay? It's all philosophical. It's funny you say you didn't want to make any enemies. You were set up to fail. You were always going to make an enemy no matter what you answered. Yeah. So I appreciate you trying to ride the line there. I would definitely say more modern Shantae games are indie. That's for sure. But yeah, for anyone that's not familiar with your channel, you mentioned a little bit about what it is, very focused on Japanese games, a lot of like figures and soundtracks and other cool stuff that I don't always see on other channels. But I'm curious, what got you started on YouTube? Like what inspired you to start the channel to begin with?
Well, it's a good question. It just seemed like it'd be something fun to do, and I had a lot of free time, and it was something that I think we'll talk a little bit about the Xbox Live Arcade era, the early days. But around that time, I was living in Japan, and this is kind of when podcasts were starting to become really big, and a friend was like, well, you live in Japan, we should do a podcast about Japanese games. And I was like, I don't know, I don't really want to look into it and do it. I think I don't really have anything to say. I was probably right back then, but I just saw there were like a lot of game, channels popping up on YouTube. YouTube was becoming a thing. It just looked like a lot of fun. And I had done editing when I was in high school, like with old VHS tapes, and I think it's the Casablanca Avio system. And I was like, yeah, we got fun to go back and do that. So I watched I think I mentioned this on another podcast, but I watched a little bit of The Angry Video Game Nerd, and he said, hey, here's how I make a video. And I was like, oh, that's pretty simple. Yeah, it's a lot more work than he made it out to look, but yeah, just kind of a lot of things. And I love video games like you guys, you fellas. It's my biggest, I guess, hobby, passion, and it's just something that I like to. If I can tell somebody about something new, something cool, share something that I'm interested in. We have the whole World Wide Web in front of us. Sometimes it's hard to get that audience, but I'm putting it out there, and sometimes it sticks, and that's good. And guys like Seth who just randomly find it and make a connection. That's awesome, So
yeah,
that's what I do.
I've been a viewer of your channel for a long time, so I'm happy that you came on. And for anyone that has not checked out the channel, Import Gaming for the Win, or FTW, I would say very high production value, much slicker and cleaner than most things you see on YouTube. I bet you would try to disagree because everyone who's good at editing thinks they're bad at editing, but I'll tell everyone that it's definitely very sharp, very slick.
Well, I'll accept your compliment, but later on I'll argue that. keep it clean. We are going to fight about Shantae. I don't want to get into any more trouble here.
I mean,
Indie Death Tournament.
Yeah.
When you say indie, it implies a certain type of game, a certain era, and I think that most people wouldn't associate that with Game Boy Color, is all I'm saying.
It's a certain feeling, right?
Yeah, it's a gut check, right?
This is a role-playing game not made by Japanese people, but it's a JRPG. This is animation not made by Japanese people, but it's anime. This is published by Capcom, but it's an indie game.
Excellent point.
Yes.
Jimmy. I love that.
I'm sorry.
That's a good way to
Thank you, Steve, for that very kind words.
Speaking of your video and videos and the production quality, I recently rewatched your most recent pickup video, and something that most people, when they do pickup videos like that, don't do. It's subtle, and maybe people don't think about it if they don't create their own content like we all do that are talking right now. You introduce game music for every single section, which is insane to me. Like most people don't do that. They'll just layer it, right? They'll just put whatever music in the background, maybe have something loop or have a playlist of some kind. Every single introduction of the 20 different items that you showed, you put a different song in, which is very serious attention to detail. And it really is immersive for the audience, like at least from my perspective. So
I think you might be the only person who's ever brought that up. Sometimes I get like, "What's the music here?" But I do appreciate. Maybe it just shows that I don't know, attention to detail. But maybe I have more free time than I actually say I do or think I do. but it's fun to do. Like I think it's I really appreciate you picking that up because it's just it kind of trying to create a mood. It's just a pickups video. It's like whatever. But something like that is just kind of fun to do. Trying to put a little bit extra into it. Because probably should just talk with no music. Some people say like I don't like the music.
I think it adds a lot to it. I loved when I hear the music coming and I could be like, oh, something Chrono Trigger is coming. Like that's awesome. I love that.
Yep.
I appreciate that. That made my day.
yeah, super cool.
I was watching that video and you're showing off the little like Chrono Trigger statues, the figures based on the promotional artwork. Like I have them in a case that you're right around the corner that you can't see, and I'm still hyped. I'm like, yeah, show me those. Those look so cool.
I love them. Yeah, that was such a good era too. And I was living in Japan when those got released, and I was at a Toys R Us, and I could not believe what I was seeing. It was like, this is nowadays. There's like pre-orders for these kind of figurines and everything like a year in advance. But they just showed up one day, and I wasn't even going to go to Toys R Us because I'm a grown ass man. What am I doing at Toys R Us? And I saw right at the register they just had all these boxes of them. So I remember buying a bunch of them, and yeah, Final Fantasy Tactics as well. It was a weird era. And they were still cheap. They weren't charging $40 for a small figure. It was like 600 yen, like $6.
Yeah, these days it would show up on,
Glad
it'd be
you
on
got
like Good
'em,
Smile
too.
or something, and it'd be $65 plus shipping to get one of those figures.
Right.
But I actually don't know. How long have you lived in Japan, or when did you move?
Oh man, I've lived in Japan on and off, and I think it's come into about 10 years, or it might have just been 10 years. But yeah, I lived in Japan. I went to school here in like 2006, and my God, that was the glory days of Japanese retro gaming. Going to all the stores, everything was still cheap, and they had so much stuff that people just did not want. And those were the good days. And then I moved in 2007 after I graduated from college. And I lived there for a few years, and that's when I, was really big into Xbox 360. We're going to talk a little bit about the Xbox Live Arcade and its connection to like the modern indie game scene, I'm sure. But that was one of my big passions, was the Xbox 360. Out of all systems in Japan, it was.
You're starving over there,
maybe.
I imagine.
Yeah, maybe I was a bit masochistic, but I just wanted to punish myself for whatever sins I might have committed. But yeah, that was a few years there, and then I moved back, lived in Hawaii for a few years. That's when I started my YouTube channel. It was also kind of a way, I didn't mention it early, but to kind of keep my Japanese, even though my work involved using Japanese, I thought it's a big good excuse for me to just play video games. And some people, there's a stigma with being an older guy playing games. I don't buy into it, but it's like, well, I also do this, so and also I can kind of keep my Japanese reading skills up and everything. And then I moved back in 2015 after I lost my job there, and they sent me to the Japan branch, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. I had no idea that you had ever moved back or anything like that. I wasn't really sure if you'd lived there essentially your whole life or if it was a recent change. So cool.
Yeah. So I spent most of my life in Hawaii, but I guess coming up close to more in Japan now. But
so when you're playing on the 360, were you mostly playing a lot of shoot 'em ups?
I was, yeah, and maybe that's a debate too. Would you consider cave games, shoot 'em ups, indie?
Yeah, here we go.
I don't know. I'd consider them very good. I'd consider them a lot of fun. But maybe,
yeah, but no, yeah, it's a tough sell, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Maybe in one weird definition somewhere on Reddit that'll be considered an indie game, but I know I was a little bit. Shooting a little bit past my wherever I can shoot. So, but yeah, I was playing a lot of shoot 'em up games, a lot of cave stuff. I was playing a lot of first person shooters and third person shooters and just everything. I just could, whatever I could get my hands on. Some of the role playing games were great on the 360 in the early years compared to the PS3 as well.
Yeah, Lost Odyssey. I loved Eternal Sonata. Bunch of those, yeah.
Oh, that was great. Beautiful game.
Yep.
Beautiful music too, obviously, with the theme of the game.
I always appreciated that those cave shoot 'em ups, for whatever reason, were the only games that they didn't make region locked, so you could import them and play them on your US 360, your North American 360 with no problems.
Yeah, those guys were smart.
Yeah,
they knew that if they wanted to make money.
Yeah,
yes, right.
They knew people like me for sure. We're ready for it, but
definitely.
All right. Well, we were going to talk then a little bit about kind of all of our experiences with, in quotes, in debate between me and Seth, and I guess now between me and Jimmy too, whatever we want to call an indie game, and what kind of led us up to there. I think for a lot of us that is 360 stuff, but before that, I'm wondering, did anybody here play any earlier indie stuff? I think of like early 2000s Flash games. Had any of you ever played anything of that era?
Yes, I definitely did. I don't know if I could recall any of the names. I remember a lot of first-person tunnel like navigation games, or like the helicopter game, or like what am I thinking of? Like the bow and arrow game where you like fling the bow and arrow with the stick man. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, like that era of like Flash game times.
I think I've told this story before. I can't remember if it's on this podcast or not, but that the helicopter game, the traditional one where when you like are holding the mouse button down or clicking a key, it flies up, and when you let go, it flies down, and you're just trying to keep it straight. Basically, yeah. Flappy Bird. In college, a friend of mine who's a really good programmer programmed a version of that game that flew up and down based on the volume of input into a microphone, and he called it Screamcopter. And so you'd sit in front of your laptop and you'd go, to control the helicopter. It was so much fun. I wish hilarious. I could get a copy of that. A true indie right there. I don't think he ever even released it or did anything with it. We just played it in class.
So I think there's a new game that has that mechanic.
Really?
I don't know. Yes, I saw it. Somebody was playing it recently, and I don't remember what it was called, but it does have that mechanic where you're trying to, it's like a platformer where your guy always runs. It's like an infinite runner. And when you have to jump, you need to scream or whatever to get get them to jump.
Mm.
So I can't remember the name of it. I have to think about it. My earliest Flash type game stuff, I'm sure you guys will remember this game. It was like an RPG but it was so rudimentary and basic. Like it wasn't Atari basic. I just cannot remember the name of it, but you could like level your guy up and you could like get different equipment and pick different paths to go. I'd have to think of the name. It was really popular back in the mid 2000s when it kind of rose up, but I cannot remember what the heck it was. Such a basic name too.
Was it like a clicker or something? Like an auto clicker at the time?
No, it was like a full blown trying to be a JRPG.
Interesting. In my head, I'm imagining like a TI-83 calculator game that you were playing, and it's the earliest indie that you can recall.
I'm going to try to look it up, but
while you look it up,
I'm trying right now.
Yeah. I'll mention a couple of mine because there were a few that I played back in the day. One, I think I've talked to at least Seth and Josh about this before, but there was an early escape room game called Crimson Room that was probably one of my first ever indies that I played. It was very basic. It looked like it could be like on almost like an old Apple computer or something like that. And it was just like a maybe 10 or 12 puzzle escape room. But at the time, that wasn't really a genre that we had ever seen or had ever heard about before. So it felt very novel and very interesting. And it had kind of this like eerie tone, like, maybe overplayed to say, but, kind of maybe a little Twin Peaksy or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I was, me and my friends played that like dozens of times. I actually later learned that in Japan, actually, there's a DS and PSP port of that game. And so now that's like high on my wish list of something that I need to track down because I had no idea that game had enough love to eventually get a physical release. Another one, this is such a specific one to me, and this is going to sound so weird, but if I'm breaking down my own history, I cannot ignore playing a lot of this game when I'm like 11 years old. There was an old Flash game. It's called Nanaka Crash. It was a like momentum-based puzzler based on an erotic visual novel that I'd never seen called Cross Channel. I guess I still haven't seen it, but I was like 11 at the time. I had no idea that it was based on this erotic visual novel because it's completely, there's no like nudity. There's nothing in the game. You play as this character, there's like 6 or 7 anime characters. You play as this one character. At the very start, a girl on a bike smashes into you and you fly off in a direction. You have kind of like speed and momentum and you fly through the air. You're going, it's kind of like, the what is it called in Smash Bros? The like home run derby where you build up a bunch of damage on a bag and then hit it. Kind of like that. And then you bounce along the ground and spaced out along the ground are different like characters from this visual novel. And they'll do different things. Some of them will launch you forward with a lot of speed. Someone will like sharply increase your angle. And then there's one that specifically stops your momentum. And then a couple others that do special things. And the whole goal is to just like build momentum using a couple of little moves you have, but mostly just kind of hoping to death that things work out and trying to increase your high scores. Me and my friends, I don't know how we ever came across this game. I think a buddy of mine told me about it. We probably put, no joke, 50, 60 hours into this simple Flash game, like one summer. And I in preparation for this episode, I went back because I wanted to look up when it released, which, released in 2005. Is a fan game actually. But I found like an old version of it still existent out on some website that was probably stealing my information in real time as I'm playing this game. But I played like 5 or 6 rounds and I was right back in it, man. It's so addicting. I can't get enough.
Yeah, that's funny. So this was definitely not indie adjacent, but I do remember just being at my dad's work and them having like a computer that actually had decent internet. Like I didn't have decent internet at home. So I do remember going to whatever website I could to play Digimon Flash games. they aren't indie, but it was that time where you could just play all these dumb browser games, right? And you would just search and just try to find as many browser games as you possibly could. And but yeah, that was my biggest memories. And that other RPG, I can't find it. I'll have to find it later, and then it'll be too late. But that's okay. So
let me know if you do. Okay, that's interesting. You say those the browser games. Another philosophical question for you. I guess that's just the name of the game this episode. Is Neopets an indie game?
Neopets.
I mean, it had a bunch of mini games. It was a very small, like kind of .com startup, right? In theory, Neopets was indie at some point.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what company made Neopets, but I definitely played some Neopets back in the day.
Shall we draft it? Shall we do some trade you? Okay, Neopets is an indie game, and now Shantae, the original on Game Boy Color, is just a normal AAA
Yep, all right,
Game Boy Color game.
That's fair. I'll give you Neopets.
The draft.
Strike that off the record.
I think
Indie's got Neopets.
I think Shantae falls squarely in the middle of the Venn diagram. If I'm speaking myself. So. But anyway,
all the strengths, none of the weaknesses.
All right. Well, Seth, why don't you tell me the exact day that Minecraft stopped being an indie? All right.
That's Josh's realm.
Yeah.
No idea.
Okay. Let me think about it. It's gonna be the time when right before Microsoft bought it. So whenever that was, so like 2000, like late 2010 or something like that. There you go. I would say that's like the height, like right before it peaked, and then it's not indie anymore. It's AAA. There you go.
All right. It's settled law. Sounds good. We're moving on. But thank you for mentioning Microsoft. An amazing segue that I'm going to just absolutely grab right onto. So I'm going to have to, I don't know how many younger listeners we have. I assume some. I'm going to have to take you back in time a little bit. I know everyone here is aware of this, but back to a time before you could just download every game digitally, when the only way to play your game is you had to go to the store, buy a disc. There was no good infrastructure for internet and no real digital storefronts to purchase games on. And then 2005 comes along, and this is before even Steam had really grown into the platform that it is now. I think Steam, if it existed, was probably still just a launcher for Half-Life. Xbox 360 comes along, and they have this digital storefront called the Xbox Live Arcade, which was kind of a bunch of different things in one. It was definitely a mechanism for indie games, but it also was kind of like the first digital distribution of retro games, similar like what would Wii Virtual Console would become and things like that. And I think that is what really kicked off the modern era of what, at least what we talk about here on the show, as indie. But just when we say indie to someone, or someone says indie to us, they're kind of talking about kind of that era moving forward. They're definitely not talking about Shantae. So,
okay.
I'm wondering, Jimmy, maybe over to you first. Do you remember what some of the first games you ever downloaded on your 360 were on Xbox Live Arcade?
Okay, I think the Xbox 360 came with that Hex kind of game.
Oh yeah,
and that was kind of the first
HD.
taste.
Oh heck yeah,
Hexic, yeah, HD. And I was like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. And it's not the kind of game I was into at the time, but I think obviously it's for a lot of people it was Geometry Wars. That was just came out of nowhere. It was had some sort of marketing behind it. People were talking about it. It was so cheap too. It was under $5 if I remember correctly. And it was just addictive, kind of at that time, considered old school fun. But yeah, there were a lot of games that I remember in the first few years. I think Assault Heroes was another game that I was really big into. It was kind of a twin stick vehicle shooter. I think they made a sequel to, maybe like Ubisoft or somebody picked up the license to it. But Yeah, that whole era, the big hype was also like I think Castlevania Symphony of the Night for me. That was a relatively early release, and they had to like extend the I think it was a 100 megabyte limit, and it was 120 megabytes. So it was like, oh god, we're going beyond. That's the thing I do remember is mostly Geometry Wars.
Yeah, it's funny. When I picked up my 360, I think I got it with Perfect Dark Zero and Condemned. And, I think most people
that's a good game.
Know how Perfect Dark Zero turned out. But yes, Condemned was a great game. I had a lot of fun with Condemned. I ended up playing Condemned 4 times in a row because I was so addicted to the achievements, and one of the achievements was broken. I really wanted it. But it's so funny that, I picked both of those games up, and easily the game that I ended up playing the most on my 360 in the first couple months was Geometry Wars, and honestly Hexic too. But people would come over and they'd want to like see the new console and stuff. They'd come over and first I would say, oh, it red ringed. Sorry, I'm getting it replaced. But when I had a working version of the console, they'd be like, yo, let's check out Geometry Wars. Let's play some Geometry Wars. I'd be like, you don't want to see the pretty shiny new games? I mean, look at Perfect Dark Zero. Look how shiny everything is. Looks so crisp. It's in 480p. Can you believe how high def that is? And they're like, no. I want to check out Geometry Wars, this simple little twin stick shooter that is, like just basic shapes flying around on a screen, but so addicting and like probably also pretty responsible. Not the first game in that genre, but like I would say most twin stick games, even today, certainly owe something to Geometry Wars and would probably cite it as an inspiration.
Sure. I think maybe even like Xbox Live Arcade's success itself, because everybody had that game. It didn't matter really what they were into. If they just got the Xbox 360 to play Gears of War, it seemed like everybody just had a download of Geometry Wars.
Yeah, it just appeared.
Geometry Wars 2 came out on DS, and then it was kind of like a...
I remember when Geometry Wars 2 came out, they added a bunch of different modes, and it didn't quite have the same feeling, but I still was pretty into that one too, because it had like a pacifist mode where you didn't shoot at all.
Yeah.
You just tried to avoid everything, and I liked that quite a bit. There's actually a recent game called Hyperdot that is very similar to that. If anyone liked pacifist mode, they should go check out Hyperdot. But yeah, both of those games, phenomenal. Josh, what about you? Do you remember any early 360 games? I actually don't know, Josh, when you got your 360 or if you even have one now.
Fun fact about me is I never had an Xbox 360.
What?
Believe it? Like, yeah, like...
This is brand new information.
Yeah.
Do you have one now, or you still never had one?
Never had an Xbox 360. I had Xbox One, which had backwards compatibility, but like the thing about it is I started listening to podcasts around that time frame. So in like the early days, like One Up Show and stuff like that, and they would talk about Braid, and they would talk about Super Meat Boy, and they would talk about, the big ones we always talk about. And at the time I was just jealous because I'm like, I want to try these games. I can't try these games. I can play games like these games, like Flash versions, or Geometry Wars was on PC, so I did try that and things like that. But like there was a lot I was missing out on. So once I was able to get those and like Humble Bundles and things like that, I got to revisit those classics that I've heard those guys talk about. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. My frame of reference is like a couple years after that was like the big thing, but I know about the zeitgeist and I know how big of an impact that era had on the whole landscape of gaming, really.
Heck yeah. Seth, what about you? I know you weren't playing so much at the time, right? But maybe those boots wandered over to the occasional friend's house that had a 360.
So my brother is about the same age as you, Steve. So what, he's 34, I guess. He's going on 35. So he had already moved out and they had a 360. So I would go and play the 360 at his house with his buddies, right? But at the house at my mom and dad's, I had to like pull teeth to convince my mom to buy us a Wii. So I had Wii. That's what we had, which it isn't the same thing as 360 arcade, but there was WiiWare. So I did have some of that. And honestly, that time from 2007 to 2011 for me was like a retro renaissance, because we had an NES growing up, and then we jumped straight to PlayStation. So when I was like really little. So I never had Super Nintendo. I never had Genesis. So I used my Wii as basically like an emulation machine for all of that stuff that was on Virtual Console, but also discovered a bunch of stuff that were WiiWare only titles. They aren't indie, but specifically things like Pokemon Rumble. Did you guys ever play Pokemon Rumble or Pokemon Rumble Blast?
I don't think I did, although I think I own one of those games on like 3DS that I haven't popped in yet.
Right.
How does that even play?
It's goofy. It's very basic, where you're walking around with whatever Pokemon you selected, and you basically bump into other Pokemon to do damage. So it's like actiony. Like, it's very stripped down and basic.
Like East?
Oh, kind of.
Is it Pokemon East? Is that what we're talking about?
Are you taking a stab at me right now? Are you doing that?
No, I'm supportive of you. This is a pro East podcast. We don't talk about it because it's indies usually, but yeah, we love East around here.
Hey, if there was an indie AAA company, it would be Falcom. Okay, so
all right, that's fair. That's fair.
So I just want to jump in here because you reminded me of a Wii game that was a WiiWare game that I remember playing a lot of, called The Lost Winds. Have you guys heard of this?
No.
It's a 2D platformer, and like the gestures in the world like guide the wind, so like you could like sweep to like do like the wind to make you jump higher, or like slam down with the wind and things like that with the Wiimote. When you were mentioning that like a memory of this game in my head, I was like, what is this game? Popped up, and I had to Google it right when you mentioned it. So yeah, just random, but that's definitely an early indie memory for sure, because it's like a small team on WiiWare. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't play it, but I recently brought World of Goo, right? World of Goo was originally only on PC and Wii, right? It was special on Wii because you could actually use the Wiimotes to build your Tower of Goo guys, right? So only played it recently on Switch, but that was a very popular indie title back on the Wii. And also not indie, but exclusive to the WiiWare service was Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth. I don't know if any of you guys... Yeah.
It's great.
So it's like, it's not indie because it's a Castlevania game, obviously. So it doesn't count. But at the same time, it was very exclusive. It was cheaper. And you said something interesting earlier, Jimmy, where you said, oh, this stuff was like only $5. Like, that is what made the indie revelation so popular, is because... college kids who had enough money for PB&J's beer and $5 indie games, right? That's all, right? Like
right.
That's what you had. So that's what's nice, and we really cherish it now. Or I guess we don't. Maybe we do the opposite of that. We overlook how nice it is to be able to have these cheap games at our fingertips, or things like Game Pass, where you have free games all the time. Back then, everything was $60 when it came out, and it was all physical, right? Mm-hmm. And so these indies all started coming, and it was kind of a win-win for us, the consumer, and for these indie developers, because they could get their stuff out there for relatively cheap, because they didn't have to put it on physical medium, right? So I don't know. I think that's probably why it started rolling, and then other people got the idea. Everybody wants to make video games, right? Now it's easier than ever. So,
yep.
Facts.
You know, you said they're $5. At the risk of just being, again, back in my day, I had to walk uphill to school in the snow both ways. They were at least on Xbox. They were not $5. They were 400 Microsoft points.
Yeah. There you go.
Yes. Their arbitrary currency that they invented.
Those darn points. Always had leftover points too.
Yep. Yeah. They had the math down pat, right? So that you'd always end up with 120 leftover points or something. Be like, well, I might as well just top up to another 500. I'm so close.
Exactly.
That's how they got
I mean,
you.
it was the exact same thing on the Wii. You could get your Wii Shop points, right? And you could get gift cards for them. And I remember asking family members, like, just give me a Wii gift. And they were just like, what even is that? But here you go. Like, whatever. Like, have fun, kid. And you'd go, and I was like 15 or whatever at the time, scratch off the code on the back, put my points in, and then just, it's like you had the world at your fingertips. It was, very new compared to GameCube or PS2. Like, I guess PS2 was online, but not like this, right? Where you could get any game, retro, new WiiWare titles that you wanted. It was just awesome. It was a different time. Now we really take advantage of it. So
I remember, just especially the Wii Shop. Even though it did kind of, it did take a long time to browse through everything, maybe because it wasn't the best setup, but I could remember spending like an hour just like, what do I get? There's so much cool stuff here, and I have 1,000 points or whatever it is. What do I do? And then it was like going to an actual store, going to a Toys R Us and looking at all the wall of the different titles. Mm-hmm. And Mom said I have to choose a game before I leave for Christmas or whatever. We're gonna be here for like another 30 minutes. This is a tough decision.
See, that's dangerous, because every time I was given that choice, I'd end up leaving with like a licensed game, and some of those were good, but like I'd always be like, all right, well, I know what Mickey Mouse is, so I'll go with the Mickey Mouse game, or I know. Oh. Even worse than that, I've seen Batman Forever. I'll get this Batman Forever game on Sega.
Oh, that's that one hits. That one cuts deep.
Yeah, I still have.
It's a terrible game.
I had to start an indie podcast just to get the taste of it out of my mouth.
There you go.
It lives with me every day.
The circle's complete. Thank God.
Yeah, no kidding. But another thing those things did, again, we're kind of drawing a circle around this entire era, indie and not, is they did a really good job, I think, introducing people like me who maybe didn't play as many of these older games to a lot of retro stuff. Wii was like super good about that with Virtual Console, but even 360, some of the like launch 360 games or very early 360 games were like Joust. And I remember Smash TV, a game I had never played before. Yes. I played for the first time in 2005 on my 360, and I was like, oh my God, this game rules. I'm assuming you guys all also went hard on, or some of you probably did, on some of that retro stuff. Jimmy, do you remember buying anything in particular?
Oh, I remember buying. I had always watched that arcade show game from the 80s, Starcade.
Oh, Starcade, yeah.
And they always played Xevious, and the music was, even though I'd never played it, the music was stuck in my head forever. I remember downloading that on 360, and I was like, I gotta get all the 200 achievement points for this, because I was into that too. And I eventually got that, like Time Pilot from Konami was another one, which is like, I always wanted to play that because I'd seen people play it on like old TV shows. And yeah, I bought those Sega stuff. It was amazing. Like, I think the last time I'd played like Streets of Rage 2 was on the Dreamcast with the terrible sound emulation, and then you can get one with actually good sound emulation, and then from there on it just kept coming and coming. So yeah, in those early days, going back and playing like retro actual Xbox Live old arcade game titles was a big appeal for me.
Yeah. And it, to some people it might seem strange because we're talking about paying $5, and maybe these days paying $5 just for kind of a straight arcade port of Joust or Xevious doesn't sound as appealing. But back then, other than maybe like some compilation discs on PS2, there really weren't other easy ways to access this. And also we just had a different sense for like what those things should be quote unquote worth. So it was a very very different but very fun time. It introduced me to a lot. So Josh, what about you? Did you play anything not on your imaginary 360 but on any friends' places or anything like that?
Specifically, like on the 360
or anything, whatever it might be. Yeah, PS3. If you had a PS3 and were doing digital that way.
Yeah, I did a lot of Super Stardust HD. It's like the quote unquote knockoff, like not quite Geometry Wars, but actually it's a really fantastic game. Like, I love Super Stardust, so that's an early memory for my PS3 for sure.
That was, fun fact, that was the first game I think to ever get trophy support. So you were hunting trophies on the original.
Then all the addictions began. This starts with Super Stardust.
It's Super Stardust gets trophies, and then the SpongeBob several years later, and then me sitting here talking to you right now. So. Yeah, that's a really good one. I played. I didn't have a PS3 right at launch, but I played that one a lot at a buddy's house. It was, it did a different thing with Twin Stick, right? It's like most Twin Sticks kind of feel like they branch out evolutionarily. Is that a word? Evolutionarily, evolutionarily from one of those two games. So that's really cool. Seth, what about you?
That's honestly beyond the Wii. There isn't a whole lot else. I actually clung on to the Wii and just, like I said, I didn't have a Super Nintendo or a Genesis. So I would sit there, like we were talking about earlier, and just peer through. I would write down, because like Jimmy said, that Wii setup in the Wii shop was terrible. So I would write down on a piece of paper every game that interests me, and then I would just search it after I was done, because there was no wish listing back then or anything like that. You would just write it down if it looked interesting. And even to like look something up to find out if it was a decent game, I would have to go and ask my mom if I could borrow her laptop. It was just like an entirely different situation compared to what we do now. Like now I peruse Steam and I have Google right here and I can just do it all at the same time. Like, okay, I see that on Steam, like literally on Steam, it says 85% approval rating my users. Like I don't even need to look at anything. I just like, yeah, general audience likes it. Right. So it was just a different time. And I mean, 10 years prior, it was even worse, right? Then all you're doing is like, oh, this cover looks fun. Like, so I guess I shouldn't really be complaining, but that was the very early days of checking out new indie games or stuff that you didn't know about online, right? I mean, that was that 07 time frame. That was the first time when you could ever really buy games online. There were free games online, but actually purchasing something like that and keeping it. Yeah. So
I remember on 360, I don't know if anybody remembers the name of it. There was like a subservice of Xbox Live Arcade that was, I think, where like self-published. It was like XNA,
it was
or something like that.
XNA, I think, was the tool that they used to make the game. So I think it was just called Xbox Indies or something like that.
Oh,
right?
yes. I think you're right. Yeah, XNA was the tool now that I think about it. But that was like, it was like the indie space almost on Xbox Live Arcade, where like the true like one-man show type games would get put out there. And that's, where like Zeboyd Games that now has made like Cosmic Star Heroine. They just released a new game recently. That's where they released their first games originally. Breath of Death and Cthulhu Saves the World.
I remember that cover. Yeah.
Yeah. Really cool, like old kind of classic, very, very much homages to like 16-bit, 8-bit style RPGs, JRPGs, but with like their own weird sense of humor and stuff. I remember playing those a lot. There was a like weird platformer called The Impossible Game, which I think is like still popular now on mobile, but it was just like this little square. And it would like automatically move to the right and you'd jump over like spikes and stuff like that.
Yeah, there is a game like that. I remember it being, my boys were actually playing a game like that. I'll have to check out. Maybe that is what it's called. But does it have like upbeat music? Yeah. I remember
it was funny because it was my, I guess my nephew, who's roughly the same age as your boys. He was playing it on like his phone or on his computer, and I was like, "This is what I was playing back when I was like a teenager.
That's exactly
how is this still popular? Like, what happened to make this game come back in vogue?"
Things just go full circle. Like kids, now kids in school have their own laptops. Like they get their own laptops home, so they find these games while they're sitting in study hall or whatever, and then it's like, oh, look at this game. And then one kid finds it and they're like, oh, look at this game. And then they come home and they're like, look how cool this game is. And I was like, I've been playing that game for 10 years, son. I told him, so.
Yeah, go and do that. The indie thing, I do remember that it was like a game called I Made a Game with Zombies in it. And that was kind of popular because it was like a $1 game.
Yes.
I remember that.
It had a weird song.
It was good.
And that was very much like of the time, right? Where the idea of putting zombies in your game was like, oh yeah, zombies, heck yes.
Everything was zombified at that time, man.
I think that game's title too was like a
movies.
bunch of, it was like leet speak basically. It was like a bunch of
like a 3 for an E or something like that. Yeah.
Ones in between the exclamation points and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. That game came out in 2009. There you go.
There you go. Damn, that's a long.
That's a long time ago, but also like, I don't know, stuff in like 2008, 2009 warps with my sense of time because it feels really far away and also feels not that long ago. Where I'm like, that was only basically a decade ago. What?
Seriously.
Okay, so speaking of that time frame, May 4th, 2010, the first Humble Indie Bundle came out. What is the highlight title? Just a guess. It's a game we've actually talked about recently. It's a highlight title of
the very first
bundle.
Humble Indie Bundle.
Yeah.
Jimmy, did you ever buy any of these? I'm wondering.
I've never bought a Humble bundle.
Neither have I. Actually.
I don't. I've always wanted to though. There's always been amazing deals, and obviously there's a good cause behind a lot of it. So I just don't play on PC. Usually I didn't have a good enough PC.
Yeah. For anyone that hasn't, back in the day, they were pay what you want bundles, which at the time was like a very novel pricing idea. And they would include a handful of indie games, usually like 1 or 2 flagship games, and then a bunch of smaller stuff that you'd be introduced to, and you could pay, $1 for them if you wanted to.
Yeah, and they still do it. It's like not as novel. Like you can go to like Fanatical and things like that and get the same type of thing nowadays. It's like everybody kind of copied them. Yeah. So yeah, but just to go back to it, the highlight game, the one that they promoted the biggest was World of Goo.
I was gonna guess.
So. Oh yeah, so it's like World of Goo and has Penumbra in it, Samaros 2, Gish, Aquaria, and Lugaru HD, which I don't think I've played any of those really, but yeah.
On 360, going back to that, what I also like too is, I don't know if any of you, I guess maybe Seth, you and Josh wouldn't, but Jimmy, I don't know if you got into when they were doing Summer of Arcade. Do you remember those events?
I was thinking when the 2010 Humble Bundle was brought up, I was remembering the 2010 Summer of Arcade. I think Limbo might have been in part of that one, but Castlevania Harmony of Despair and like those were what I was really excited about, because you'd get like some of the more mainstream titles, but you did get like a Limbo, or you'd get like a Castle Crashers or something like that, I believe.
Wow, that's a really good memory that
Trials, I think, was one of them too.
You can remember going back to
2008. Yeah, 2008 of that. Geometry Wars 2. Galaga Legions. Braid.
Yeah.
Like, I think Braid just came out for the very first time in 2008.
That was the one
Xbox
I picked up.
Live Arcade, So, that's a really interesting thing to think about. Like, we on the list here, we got From Dust, we got Bastion, we got...
Bastion. That's a good dang game right there.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff on there, Explosion Man,
I love,
and things like that.
Twisted Pixel.
Yeah. Shadow Complex.
I
love Shadow Complex. That's a good one.
I love that too. Would you consider that an indie? Because Microsoft did publish it. I mean, they published like most of those games, even on the 360 if they were published by people on other platforms. But I was thinking about Shadow Complex. I was going to ask you guys if you would consider that indie, because back then it was considered like an indie game, I think.
Yeah, it's Chair Entertainment, right?
Chair Entertainment, I believe so.
I don't know what other stuff Chair's done, but I would say I probably would call it indie just because it has the spirit of indie. All right, indie's a gut check.
Yeah,
and I think Seth disagrees, but I would call that one an indie. In its time, it was indie.
Probably.
So Shantae, though, right?
Shantae is literally the spirit of indie. I mean, like the flagship character of indie games, but whatever.
It was on a physical cartridge. I could buy it right next to Pokemon Gold on the shelf at Circuit City. So.
There was only like 15,000 copies, Steve. It was very limited. You did not see it at Circuit City, I bet.
I have a vivid memory of walking past a Shantae.
Really?
Yes, it was on an end cap sitting there and walking by and thinking like, oh, that game looks kind of weird, and just moving along with my life, not knowing that I was leaving a stack of $100 bills sitting on the counter.
Sure.
Gosh.
I remember seeing it in Walmart.
Oh, really?
Of all places. Yeah, and I remember always going back thinking like, I could get that game. I think it was like, $30 or something like that. But I was a kid, I didn't have my own money, so
right.
It would have been like, hey, can I get an early something gift or can I mow the lawn 5 times or something like that.
That's like hearing people talk about seeing stacks of Earthbound that are on clearance and stuff like that, right? Like, oh yeah, it's a bin full of Earthbound and Madden 93 or whatever, right? That were all budget games. And it's like, that's insane. No way.
That's great. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know why people didn't have taste back then. Earthbound is so good. How could you ever let that game become a clearance game?
I imagine somebody played it and they were like, that is a good game. But then there was no thought back then thinking like, this is going to be worth something someday. Nobody thought any of it was going to be worth anything. And honestly, the fact that we have any cardboard left is kind of crazy. Like that somebody had the wherewithal to keep it back then, right? Mm. So, but
yeah, and now people have to beg for a physical version. Yes. Like we just now got like the Cuphead version for the very first time. Yep. Like this year, so that's crazy.
It is.
Yeah, you have to have like boutique publishers just to get the indie stuff because mainstream won't produce it. It's a bummer.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you guys have any other thoughts on the classic indie stuff? I wanted to transition a little bit into just kind of what it's like to be living in Japan and just the indie scene in Japan. You guys have any other thoughts before that?
No, that sounds good. All I'll say is if you have the opportunity, climb into a time machine and go back to like late 2000s because it was a weird time. Loading up the Xbox 360 with the Blades interface to log into Xbox Live Arcade. You can't recreate that experience.
Blade themes that are worthless. Yep. Yeah, that became worthless after a few years. Like, hey, I spent like $2 on this theme. That's my fault. I shouldn't have done that. Right. now it doesn't work anymore.
Getting so excited for like the little tiny avatar icons that would be of like Elvis from Perfect Dark or sports teams or something.
I will not lie. I did spend quite a bit on the random packs of like a game that I don't even like. I think it's like some sort of like simulation RPG. I was like, I just want like a cool looking anime character avatar that no one's gonna have. So I remember buying random packs of like 20 characters and hoping one of them would be cool. And I went through several, and I was like, how much money did I spend on Microsoft points here in Japan? And so stupid.
That's crazy.
So dumb. No responsibility with money in my early 20s. So
that sounds like 15 years ago Genshin Impact, because that's pretty much what they do now. Just toss money to hope you draw a rare.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Xbox avatars no one else has seen before were the original 5-star pulls. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Where'd you get that, bro? Yeah. I will say before we move on, I just want to give like a special, I guess, not a shout out, but like I loved during that Xbox Live Arcade era was like Twisted Pixel. We mentioned Explosion Man was one of them, but like the Maw and Comic Jumper, and I think that's when they got bought by Microsoft. I think they're not owned by Microsoft anymore. I don't know what they did after they got bought by I guess the Gunstringer was a Connect game, but like especially Comic Jumper, it's not a really good game. It's like a twin stick kind of platform shooter game. I don't know if you've played that.
No,
but no. Oh god, it is one of those weird meta games where he would jump into different genres of comics. He's like a fallen comic book star, so he'd go in like a manga world, like a Conan the Barbarian world, and had all these cool references from like people our age. Like, hey, I like Conan the Barbarian. There's like a little Arnold Schwarzenegger looking Conan, and there's anime, and they're kind of poking fun of the style and some of the shortcuts in the comics, and you go through different panels, and it was a really awesome game. So if you guys haven't played that, I would really recommend Comic Jumper. Like I said, not the best game. It's kind of repetitive and a little bit tedious, but the humor and the music the art style is great.
It kind of reminds me of Comic Zone. I mean, just
Comic Zone. Yeah,
description.
That must have been. Yeah, it must have been like a huge influence, but we always liked that team, and they always put out really cool stuff. And I guess also Double Fine, they had some really cool. They were published by like THQ and other companies, but I was playing yesterday this game called Trenched. I think it changed the name to Iron Brigade, but it was a cool like third-person shooter tower defense game in an alternative World War I, and I just played a few levels of it, and it brought me back. Just really good humor, good. That team's always make good games, but I think it's a game that I don't see a lot of people really talk about anymore.
Interesting.
So to throw some of those
I've
in
never
there.
even heard of this one before. It seems pretty cool.
Yeah, give it a try if you're into that kind of stuff. But
if we're giving shout outs
the creativity was so cool. Yeah.
If we're giving shout outs to like random games that we loved back then, did anybody ever play Eats Chowdown? Am I the only person alive that ever played Eats Chowdown?
That's a cool name, but I never played it.
It's a really early game by what's the name of that studio? Let me look at that real quick. It's Clay Entertainment. The folks that went on to make Don't Starve, like one of the most popular indies around.
Yeah.
One of their earliest games. It was kind of like Lemmings. It was like a really colorful, almost like kind of had like almost like a Cartoon Network-y sort of vibe, maybe, or like just like that early kind of mobile-ish, indie-ish vibe. But it played like Lemmings, where you'd place down these different like obstacles. And they were like whales and stuff like that. And then the eat character would automatically walk. And then when it got to one of the whales you placed down, you could press a button to make the whale like eat the eat and then spit it out and like launch it in a direction. And so you'd be trying to like place them in the right path so that when he walked around, he would collect all the different objects on a level and eventually end up getting like a puzzle piece at the end. I loved that game back in the day, and no one else. I never knew anyone that had ever played it. I still don't know anyone that ever played it. Where are my Eats fans at?
You can get it on Steam. Eats Munchies on Steam. Is that the same thing?
I wonder if it is, because it was definitely called Eats Chowdown back in the day.
I remember that name for sure, but I never played it. Sorry.
No, no one has, so I can't blame you. It's living alone on Eats Island.
All right, so moving on to kind of the Japanese indie scene. So when I was watching your pickup video, Jimmy, this was like a perfect previous to what I even knew we were going to be talking about segue. You recently purchased a very extravagant, large collector's edition of Ender Lilies.
It's funny. I was going to talk about it.
Nice. Perfect. So, like,
I'm always trying to spread the word.
Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to play it for a long time, and some people in the Discord have played it, said it's really good. The big thing that I associate Japanese video game developers with is AAA games, right? Lots of our favorite AAA games come from massive Japanese game companies like Nintendo and Sony and Square Enix and Falcom and things like that, right? So I don't know a lot of small Japanese developers, but Livewire is one, and they made Ender Lilies, which is awesome. But I didn't know if you could talk to some of that, and if you knew anybody other than that, or just talk about Ender Lilies, or yeah.
As far as Japanese indies, I kind of look back to obviously there's the doujin gaming scene, from even way back in the PC, PC 88, 98.
Oh yeah.
A lot of it is not quite though. Is it Nanaka Crash? Not kind of erotic, actually erotic. Don't show the children these games. Very very trashy adventure dating kind of games. But there's always been a doujin scene here, and I think obviously I don't know much about it, but I see it everywhere. And there's a lot of games available for Switch. But the Toho project is probably the biggest.
Oh yeah.
And to this day, I still have never played any of the games, but that's the spirit of indie. One guy I think created the entire the original bullet hell Danmaku shooting games. He did the music, the art using Photoshop, I think. Did the music himself, and then he just lets people basically almost carte blanche use my characters, use it, and just make your own games. And I don't know if he gets any money from it, but it's such a popular series. And if you go to a used media store, and if they have any sort of cool selection of anything, they'll probably have a bunch of fan made doujin games of what do you call it? Toho project.
Yeah.
As far as more, I guess that's probably the most mainstream indie thing that's here in Japan. But people love Undertale. I mean, before, I guess, was it 2010? You guys were saying before Minecraft was bought by the evil empire. I mean, kids love Minecraft. I think a lot of Western games have been picking up steam here in Japan, like over the last. Like, first-person shooters were a big thing, but like just the indie games too. Like Undertale is incredibly popular with young people. It's very it's kind of nice to see. I shouldn't say that I've not played Undertale, but I've seen a lot of it, and I would like to play it someday. But yeah, as far as like Ender Lilies, games like that on the Switch, there's a lot of games that just it reminds me of the PS1 era in Japan.
Nice.
Where it was like almost like a Wild West. All these weird publishers just pop up, and then they get these indie teams, these small groups of developers to make these games. I feel like you guys get a lot more cool physical. Like I'm another physical collector. I love just having the actual thing there in my hand or on my shelf, whatever. But it seems like there's some physical games that Japan gets that doesn't get released in the West, but there's a lot of cool stuff, obviously, with like limited run and anything with limited rare in the publishing title.
Special reserve.
Yeah. It's all those. But we do have a lot of like adventure type games that are, I guess, would probably be considered indie technically. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on the Switch, especially, and the download section is crazy especially with the sales. A lot of these games just get marked down to like basically the equivalent of like $1.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I wish I could tell you more of the modern indie games, but I did pick up this game. It's not a good game or anything, but it's called Tasugare ni Nemurumachi. I think it's called Tasomachi for the Switch. I like the art.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, this
nice.
doesn't.
The art and the music is great. Obviously, people who are listening, they won't be able to see it, but not a great game. It's just like a open world platforming type game. But I was surprised that at probably the biggest electronics store in Japan, at least the one in my town, for some reason they really promoted this game.
Really?
I bought it without seeing it, but so one of the staff members drew the character and had a little a little comment card next to it. And then, a lot of stores will do that. Like one of the staff members might just draw a little cute thing and try to promote it. But for some reason they were promoting this game, and it's the publisher's Playism, and they publish a lot of these smaller titles. You've probably seen a few of them here and there, but it's interesting that indie games like Beep. I think it's Beep from the store in Akihabara, the legendary retro PC game store. But like Huntdown was, I think, a limited run game in the States.
Huntdown,
but it was like a $20. Yeah, it was like a $20 game here. I think it's an indie game, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But cool little game, and they have it's a little bit of a different scene here, I guess. But
do you think the general public in Japan is in on the indie game scene like I assume in the States it's a pretty big deal, or is more of the general public like still latching on to the AAA developers in Japan?
Yeah, I would say it's you go to the store and obviously it's the big display for Elden Ring, which I love from
which
software.
We do have that too, but like Hollow Knight is as popular as any of that stuff over here. I mean,
that's
you can
amazing.
see displays. Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, there's unfortunately, unless you go to a really niche specialty store, which would sell stuff like the Toho Project stuff, things like an anime store, you might get that over. You still get a little bit of the mainstream stuff, but it's mostly like, anything published by Square Enix is going to be big and published. Anything from Nintendo, like, it was like a couple months ago probably, but I remember I went to like that same electronics store which was promoting this little tiny game for some reason. But there was like a line coming almost outside of like the store for the Pokemon game that came out. So all those things, like Splatoon was the same thing. There was just a long line. So the mainstream stuff obviously is the biggest thing. If you're a real nerd in Japan though, you're into like the indie stuff. You're into Toho Project. You've played Undertale. Young people, I think maybe because of the affordability, kind of we were talking about Geometry Wars, that frat bro culture. It's like $5, bro. It's trippy. I don't have to get intoxicated to play this, but the kids are like, hey, this is cool. It kind of speaks to me. You could kind of tell the people who made it are in the kind of same. Their heart is in the same place. They're kind of nerdy, whatever. There's a lot of that, but the other side of the indie gaming thing is like not safe for life conversations, I think. Not safe for work, not safe for probably your life. Not trying to judge or anything, but in moderation, sure. But
there you go.
but that's my impression of the scene. But yeah, video games are still just like, oh, you have a Switch, and it's like, oh yeah, but there's tons of cool small things on the Switch, but it's Splatoon, it's Smash Brothers,
right?
Mostly, yeah. So it's I think of it kind of like also like as like vinyls, like records, like. That's something that I'm super jealous of you guys too. You have all these cool companies, these small companies releasing all these video game vinyls, and for me, I'd have to import that, and then we get the charge up. And once in a while, you'll say, "Oh, there's the Castlevania soundtrack for $100-something," and like, damn,
it is
it's hard to get.
It is very interesting to hear you say that you're jealous of us, because I am extremely jealous that you get to walk into a store like at every street corner, and there's just this monopoly of retro video games. Like that does not have, as that doesn't happen here, right? Like we can't go buy. I remember you talking on Drunk Friend about grabbing Suikoden 2 or something for $1. Like that, you like if we even saw a Japanese Suikoden 2, it would be like, look at that! Like you would get it immediately. I don't care how much it costs. Like it would be so cool to see. So,
yeah, it's not as good as it used to be.
Yeah,
obviously, I think that the rise of online, like, there's always been Yahoo Auction, but it's just so easy and accessible. Like Mercari services like that, people know. Like instead of getting, 10 cents for my Suikoden 2, I can get $2 for it. And so I mean, you still have to go drop it off and send it, but it's one of those things. So and of course with the people from abroad are able to access those marketplaces through proxy services more and more. So when I do sell things to people here in Japan, sometimes I'll get like a proxy service, and I've told a few people about it too. Like they can't find us. Hey, have you ever seen this? And just the other day, somebody was looking for some Famicom disc game with glasses, and I was like, let me just look to see on Mercari if they have it. And I sent the guy like, hey, just look up this term, and he's like, oh, I went to one of those proxy services, I got it. It was all under $50, which is like, maybe it's like $300 or something on eBay. I don't know.
Wow.
But he was like, what? He's like, what even is this place? It's just, it's just like a little online flea market, as they call it.
Yeah, basically.
So, but yeah, everyone has access to that. It just, it still takes time, and you have to pay a little bit extra, but everything's becoming more connected.
Yeah, I think the
for better,
tricky parts for those for me. Basically, what you're saying is that people like me that want to buy the cool Japanese only stuff are ruining it for everybody, because now it's all gone up in price. But I don't know, sometimes it's hard to search for what you want. It's hard to find, what do I type into this proxy service to get what I'm looking for?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just obviously, if you have any questions, let's ask me. I'll try to help you out with like the good terms and everything. But so some of the search engines are better than others. Like Yahoo Auction's great. You can type in things and they'll find things relatively for you. But some of them, like, it has to be specific, even like down to like spaces in between. So even if you do get the right name, you might have to like, oh, is there a space here, or is there some sort of other character here, and it might not find it. So it is kind of a pain in the butt. But so you haven't quite ruined it for all the rest of us here anyway yet, until they get their search engines better, or just do the English translate. But yeah, it is pretty amazing that you can do that.
What I do know, like a little hookup between two people that are on this podcast right this second. Jimmy, I know you're trying to sell stuff, and my co-host is always trying to buy things.
I mean, we'll talk later. We'll talk later.
Steve will buy anything that you don't want on that back shelf. I'm willing to bet. So
I mean, I am literally been like, I've got a save search for that Goemon plush.
Oh yeah, we could definitely just let me know. We can talk. I got I love all this stuff, but I gotta get rid of it.
Are you just downsizing the collection?
Just a little bit. I love having all this stuff, but and I don't buy anything that I don't like. which makes it kind of difficult. But yeah, downsizing. If you see like, you know, this backdrop here, this is basically my entire apartment. I need to get out of here. I need to find a nicer place. But yeah, you guys are all responsible adults, and I'm not. And like I said, I you know, in my early 20s, like I said, I was buying random Xbox Live avatar packs from games I don't even like the Tower of Chaos or something like that. Like, well, I don't even know what this is, but like, hey, there's a cool chick with purple hair. This is probably a winner. So.
I mean, you say that we're the responsible ones, but I was the one going out and spending $5 to rent the Avatar game on 360 because it had easy achievement points. See, you knew what I was going to say. I was like, you know,
my horse and me.
Yeah, I can get my easy 1,000, get this back to Blockbuster same day. All right.
That's right. Do you have Terminator 3 or Terminator Salvation on
my account?
Because I heard that was an easy one.
I don't,
too.
but I've always been tempted by it. Yeah, it was like one of the earliest easy points, easy trophies.
So like that and like the King Kong game, right? That's another one I hear people talk about, right?
I have that one, unfortunately, on my gamer card. I thought it was pretty
I'll stick up for that game. I think that King Kong game was pretty fun.
No, it was a good game.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's decent.
Yeah, probably better than the movie.
You just play through the story. Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, going to like the achievement points and like trophies, I think that might have been also like a way to kind of make these games more popular, is because there were people who were addicted to achievements, and especially, you know, there was a 200-point cap for those games. I don't know if they ever changed it, but some of it was like, oh, okay, it's a short game. I can get some more achievements, get my Chivos.
Yep, I need my Chives.
My sweet Chives. Yeah, the sweet Chives. And so it was like, yeah, $5, I can, you know, one up my brother-in-law, whoever, and it's like, look what I got. I got more achievement points than you.
Yep.
Well, I got your sister, so I don't know what kind of conversations people were having back then, but I think the achievement points too kind of drove up a little bit of interest as well. Just affordable, and you can keep adding to your growing gamer score, which is the worst type of, I guess.
I mean, it's an addiction that we all enjoyed. I was definitely a victim to that too. One of the few systems I still had hooked up and available to me was my Sega Genesis. I could have just went and played Sonic there, but instead I downloaded the Xbox version of Sonic 2 because I could get 200 achievement points by rebeating Sonic 2 on the Xbox Live Arcade.
Right. Yep. Right. You also get leaderboards if you're into that.
True.
But the achievements were the real leaderboard.
Yes, I mean, at some point we stopped introducing each other by name. We just introduced each other by gamer score.
Yeah.
If you're under 50K, don't want to talk to me.
Don't want to talk to you. Yeah. Before Tinder, it was the Xbox Live service.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm looking for a high value man, a high gamer score value man.
I'm sick of dating sub 25Ks. All right. If it's not 6 digits, don't even bother swiping me.
Yeah, don't at me.
My man got there without any sort of the girl games or whatever. Easy achievement points.
Didn't boost on any visual novels, all right?
Didn't boost, yeah. Exactly. Doesn't he have an Xbox Achievements Forum account to meet up with people to play online games that nobody plays anymore to get those achievements?
Exactly.
Those are the old days. Whew.
So, how much of that back shelf is physical indie stuff, do you think? Is it mostly retro stuff? I know you have the Ender Lilies, but do you have much physical indie stuff? I know you could probably get some of that stuff from Play Asia and stuff like that, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as far as like a lot of the stuff that I have, they're like, you know, older, so it kind of goes like, what is your definition of an indie game again?
Yeah.
Like a lot of the PS1 stuff I have is like, so for example, one of my favorite games, The Adventure of Little Ralph. That was one of those games, you know, it was released in 99. It was supposed to be like an X68000 PC game, and then it kind of went through all these different stages. Mm-hmm. And then they released it on PS1, new corporation. And it's like a old style retro. Before there was a lot of that, like, it's like a throwback to retro. This was like 1999, throwback to retro. So that's, you know, I would consider that an indie game because it's self-published, self-developed. It's a very small team of people. Yeah. So I have a lot of PS1, maybe some Saturn games like that, but most of my indie stuff, like, again, is just like usually from that Xbox 360 era where it was download only. Would have loved to have physical editions of all that stuff. Fingers crossed. Maybe like one of the reasons why I wanted to get a Switch again, had it and sold it, was it's like there's a lot of good stuff on there, the downloadable games, and
yes,
just then they're releasing more physical, which is so nice.
Yeah, that's why I was very happy a year ago, or a little over a year ago, to get a decent laptop to be able to get. Like, honestly, I had never had a PC. Really, in my entire life. I would use my mom's, but then, when I kind of moved out and everything, I would have laptops, but they weren't gaming laptops, right?
Sure.
So to be able to have something like this, where now like the entire world is unlocked on Steam, right? It's so nice. Like whatever I want. If I have a couple bucks and I have the time, I can buy it and play it. And yeah, I mean, Switch is like a portable version of that, right? Switch just has so much stuff. Like, it's insane how many indies, specifically companies, are making their games only for Switch, which is
Sure.
awesome.
Right.
So,
yeah. Oh, I had a question for Jimmy. What is your favorite indie game? What's an indie game that you would recommend to everybody? Maybe one that maybe not like the most popular out there, one that's a little more obscure.
There was a game called Halo Wars on Xbox. It was a real-time strategy. That's Halo Wars. All right, they don't make that anymore. I would say, like, I brought it up earlier, but I really love that game, Comic Jumper, from Twisted Pixel.
Okay. There we go.
And that's one that I think that, for me, it was a big deal when it came out. I just, probably people were annoyed. I was like, yeah, dude, you got to play Comic Jumper. It's like, okay, cool, yeah, whatever. Playing Red Dead Redemption right now, kid. But to me, it was just like it had a lot of weird, like there's a lot of like indie type tropes where it's like almost memey. A lot of that kind of era had a lot of memey stuff, but that was like they had live action video cut of like the developers acting in weird scenes with, using the comic book as like toilet paper and weird stuff like this, split in with like all these cool, like wonderfully animated things. And that you could tell that they all just worked very closely on it. So that would be like my favorite. But recently it would be, as Seth was bringing earlier, like, Ender Lilies. Like, you guys mentioned Hollow Knight, and I hate to say this, but I've always wanted to play it, but I never played it.
Oh,
and
you'd love it.
It's something I know I would love it. A lot of people say that Ender Lilies reminds them of Hollow Knight. So
yes.
Like that style of game is what I really like. And there's a lot of cool like indie games. Record of Lotus War came out. It's not the greatest kind of Metroidvania game-ish, but that was released on Steam I think a year or two ago, and they've released the physical edition end of 2021. Like anything like that, I'm just a big fan, But Ender Lily is just the music. It's a very small team, great music, great art direction, and the game is super fun. And
I got to bump
those
down
would be
up
like
higher on my backlog now. You've definitely got me hyped about it.
Main quest, that one. Yeah. if you can.
I'm sure.
And if you don't like it, then sorry.
Yeah, people have talked about it a lot. I had someone outside of like the Discord gaming sphere recommend Ender Lilies to me, which was interesting, right? Like, yeah. I mean, the person is a gamer, but I don't talk to them all the time, infrequently at work and stuff. And they're like, you got to check out Ender Lilies. I'm like, okay. And at that time, I think how did it release initially? It wasn't on everything. Was it only on PC to begin with?
I think it was Steam in 2021, maybe the middle of 2021. And then they released the PS4, Switch physicals March of last year.
Right. So I didn't have a way to play it initially. Yeah, because I didn't have my PC back then. So I'm like, well, if it ever gets released on consoles, then I'll play. And I just haven't had a chance to. But now I am extremely jealous of that collector's edition. Like, I want that. Now I just want that. Like, I want to play it, but I want that to play it with. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I hope it stopped being overhyped. That's the thing. Like, and you play, it's like, oh, that's all right.
But, I've heard it's good. I've heard it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks for asking about that though.
Yeah. Yep. Do you guys have anything else you wanted to chat about before we close it on down?
No, I'm just being stressed because I'm trying to see if there's a way to play Comic Jumper now. I wonder if it's even still downloadable.
Oh, you can play it on your Xbox. You can play it on your Xbox One. I
Did
looked
you?
it up.
Oh, heck yeah. Good looking out.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
is it Comic Jumper: The Adventures of Captain Smiley?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And like I said, like it's when you play the game, you'll be like, "Oh, I'm fighting another wave of enemies," because it's very repetitive. But it's like the next cutscene or the next world you get to. I guarantee it'll put a smile on your face. The dialogue is so just funny and goofy, and the style is so good, and the music is great. But yeah, I wish the game was a little bit more polished. But it is what it is. It's kind of like Explosion Man.
Okay.
I like Explosion Man, but it's the same kind of. It's the same group, obviously, same development team. They use the same, I think it was called Beard, was their game engine. So it kind of feels that way, where it's like, it doesn't really feel like a lot of other games in the similar style because it's their own engine. But yeah,
Yeah,
Cool.
I've always been interested, especially in that one and in the Maw. Well, Comic Jumper I
The
knew of
Maw's
and I
good,
forgot
yeah.
about, and you're reminding me of it, which is getting me hyped about it. But
Uh-huh.
the Maw too, I
good.
always wish I had
Hope
played.
you
The only
like it.
game by Twisted Pixel I've ever played is Missplosion Man, and I liked it quite a
Okay.
bit. But I really only played it because I think Limited Run did a physical release of it, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that game, and so I ended up picking that up for Switch.
Cool. Yeah, the Maw was the first one I think they released, and that was the first one I played of them, and I was like instantly, it's like whatever these guys put out, I'm looking forward to it.
Nice.
It's not the same developer, but Binary Haze, who published Ender Lilies, is publishing some kind of like strategy RPG type of game that's coming out pretty soon. So I'm gonna have to look into that. But
Yeah,
I don't know what the actual developer is doing, Livewire. But
I know you're a fan of RPGs. Before we get to wrap up, have you heard or looked into? I think is it called Chained Echoes? U2, is that what that
Yeah,
new
the one that just
RPGs?
came out. That's like a throwback to Chrono
Like
Trigger.
Chrono Trigger, yeah.
16-bit JRPGs.
I think I might have been watching like, the Happy Console Gamer talk about like hyped games for 2023.
Yeah, he mentioned that one. And,
and it looked good. Yeah, or it just came out maybe.
Yes, at
it was
the
some-
very
I
end of
think
2022. Yep.
Yeah, I think he was talking about games that he missed, and I was like, that looks good. It's a Western developer too, right?
I think
I
so.
believe so.
Yeah, I think it's
All right.
a very small team. I don't know if it's one person, but it's a real
Yeah.
small team. But it's on Game Pass, so it got a lot of attention, and it seems to be a pretty faithful callback to that style, which is good because sometimes some of those games don't always land as well as they could. But this one seems to be pretty popular, pretty universally. I'm pretty pumped to try.
Oh yeah, sounds like it's good reception, and yeah, if I can find like a copy where I can actually just pay for it. It's kind of stuff I like to support,
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
That's the same way. I'm always just waiting. Like,
Awesome.
all right, give me that physical edition so I can
Yes.
send you the money. Let's go.
And then coming up, I assume most people that are a fan of video games at all have heard of Sea of Stars. So I'm assuming you know what Sea of Stars is, and you're excited for that to come out, which is basically a direct rip of Chrono Trigger.
I don't know much about it. I just heard of the
really?
name. Yeah, so
Wow. Yeah.
so I'll definitely look into that. Let me write that
Yeah, it's
down.
beautiful. It's from the studio that did The Messenger. If you played The Messenger before or seen The Messenger before.
I've seen it. Yeah.
So kind of a big shift, right? They went from like making this like side-scrolling Ninja Gaiden style action kind of Metroid game, and then now they're doing like a callback to, like you said, Seth, it's very Chrono Triggery, but it also kind of has like some Star Ocean vibes in there too. Maybe just because it's literally called Sea of Stars, but like
Yeah.
Sea of Stars.
The composer is, or at least one of the composers is Yoshinori Matsuda. Who did the Chrono
that's gonna
Trigger
be- yeah,
soundtrack. So
it's gonna be a stellar.
yeah, the
soundtrack.
music's gonna be bomb and badass. Yeah, it's gonna be kick ass.
Oh hell yeah!
So, yep.
All right, I'll definitely thank you. I'm gonna definitely look into that. It's exciting.
heck yeah.
Good games.
Well, Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can they find you in on the internet? Just anywhere, your YouTube, Twitter, whatever.
I have a YouTube channel. It's just Import Gaming for the Win FTW. I have that, which I post my main edited stuff, and also like we were talking about pickup stuff early, just whatever I feel like putting on there. I have a second channel, the Import Gaming for the Win Dump, which is like old VHS tapes and old trailers and commercials that I find on old media here in Japan. And that's just whatever. It's just a fun thing to do. I had Twitter, deleted it, had Twitter, deleted it, had Twitter, deleted it. But I did set up another Twitter again. So I might start using it. So Import Gaming for the win there. And that's it. I'm an old man. I tried to get you guys to do this on Skype. Instead,
I was like, we'll do Zoom.
Yeah,
we'll do Zoom.
Pretty sure at this point Windows
Zoom
Defender
sounds
would
good.
put the hands up if you tried to download Skype.
That's funny.
But I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on. I had a great time talking with you fellas, and looking forward to hearing more. And I'll definitely look into some of these games we talked about. And wow, keep on doing what you guys do. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome.
Steve, where can they find you on the internet? I made sure to ask you when you took a drink.
I mean, I'm always taking a drink. You probably have to edit out so much ice clinking. I apologize. But yes, if you want to find me on the internet, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube, all as Blinkoom, Blinkoom, M like ma, comma, the. And yeah, on Twitch, I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, a lot of retro stuff, a lot of indie stuff, all sorts of various things. So come hang out. It's a good time.
All right, Seth, our captain, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me at Captain Drachma on Twitter and, of course, in the Polymedia Discord, best place on the internet.
You can find me at Frantic Society on Twitter. You can send us emails and at IndieQuestPod@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter, IndieQuestPod. If you have any comments from our conversation here with Jimmy, please send us an email. We'd love to talk about it. But besides that, thank you so much for listening today. Thanks again, Jimmy, for coming on.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Peace.